I want to switch gear a bit. I want to go to the ocean space a bit, and I want to have like three subjects. What should we stop doing in the ocean? What should we scale up? And what should we invent or 10x? So if you start with what needs to stop, I have some examples. We can take oil, gas, overfishing, pollution. Is there anything you say like stop now or drastically stop with any of these things? I mean, of course, pollution needs to stop pretty soon.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a matter of priorities, right? So here's the myth that I'd like to dispel. There's this myth, and it's a very popular myth, that Western countries, developed nations like mine and yours, are generating plastic waste and it's ending up in the ocean. So that's a myth. That's not happening. When you look at where the macro plastic in the oceans is coming from, it's directly traceable to two things: fishing, the fishing industry, the industrial fishing industry, which loses lines and nets and traps at an alarming rate. And those things cause a lot of damage to the ecosystem, and that really needs to be regulated. And the other thing is basically poverty. So emissions resulting from a lack of sanitation along 10 rivers in Asia and Africa, because the people there have other priorities like staying fed and housed, and waste collection and disposal is kind of an afterthought. That's where the macroplastic in the ocean's coming from. And then the question is, well, what about the microplastic? And the thing about microplastic is it really, people have looked hard, and with very few exceptions where the issue isn't the plastic itself, but something in the plastic. And one example of that being rubber wear. So when you have tires in cars, the rubber particles were being found in streams and it was affecting fish, but it wasn't the rubber. It was an additive, an antioxidant in the rubber that was actually causing the fish to be impacted. And so by simply changing the formulation of the rubber, you can eliminate that environmental hazard. It's not the rubber, it's the additives. So anyway, the thing that I would say to people is, I don't think that microplastic is really all that big a deal. And I don't think that it's a high priority. And the very last thing we should do is that dumb thing where you try to scoop up plastic from the surface of the ocean with big nets. This whatever ocean cleanup thing, that's just dumb. Okay, that's dumb. The thing to do is to, if you're going to put some kind of collection, you put it at the mouths of the rivers, or better still, you don't have people dump crap onto the side of the road and wash into the ocean. So
but they started actually, I looked up ocean cleanup, and they actually started going into rivers instead before it goes into the ocean. Maybe it's a better idea.
Makes a lot more sense. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. But the thing that makes even more sense is make sure that people in the world have deposit return. So nobody buys something like, and I know you guys do that in Norway, and we do it in some provinces in Canada for some things and not in others. So we're not, because we have a federal system here. So some provinces do things that are smart and others don't. And anyway.
How much oil is,
gas?
Yeah.
Oil and gas, we have to stop oil and gas. The oil and gas that we'll need in the future, we need about a quarter of it to 15% of it for applications like chemicals and plastics and the like. And that stuff we'll get from terrestrial locations. We won't need to do it offshore anymore. That stuff can stay there for the next 1,000 years until people get desperate enough for it, for their materials and plastics needs in the future, that they're willing to go offshore again. We don't need to do that for another 1,000 years. We've got enough Saudi oil, low lift cost, light and sweet, and they're going to be desperate to sell it to anybody. They'll be selling it for $10 a barrel. So it won't really be a big problem. We'll have all we'll need for plastics and materials. All we got to do is stop burning it, because burning it's dumb. Mendeleev, the father of the periodic table, he and I agree about something. And that is, he said that burning petroleum is like keeping warm in your house by burning banknotes in the kitchen stove. And I agree with him completely. That material is precious, it's finite, it's used for purposes that literally save human lives, and we're burning it. Future generations are going to look back at us and say, you guys are stupid. Like, how could you be so dumb? It's kind of like me looking back on the people in the late 1600s, early 1700s, where they had 500-year-old trees in Quebec and Ontario, and they chopped them down and just burned them because they wanted farmland.
Definitely. If you go to what needs to scale up, I don't have so many examples. I think personally, aquaculture should be scaled up because I don't see any other possibilities.
Yeah, my father-in-law would agree with you, and he's actually a critic of aquaculture and a supporter of aquaculture when done right. And so he's a salmon fisherman, so a sport fisherman, and he's seen damage caused to the salmon sport fishery by farming of salmon in improperly, and the spread of disease and other issues. And so he is also, though, a very pragmatic person, a very well-educated person, and he understands that in order to provide protein to people in the world that need it, aquaculture is a good way to do it, but there's right and wrong ways to do aquaculture. So as long as you do aquaculture right, I don't have a problem with it. But then again, I don't have an ethical problem with eating animals. There are lots of people who do. So, and I'm not casting judgment on them one way or another. I eat animals, and I'm a member of the other PETA. There's the people for the ethical treatment of animals, and I belong to the people enjoying tasty animals. So.
What about offshore wind? And maybe I see some people put solar panels on the ocean.
Offshore wind is a win-win. I've seen studies where people actually looked at the environmental impact of offshore wind, and they found out that the wind turbine bases actually provide habitat for anchor species like mussels. So the environmental impact of the wind turbines offshore is actually negative. Like there isn't any. So that's
you just want to scale. Do you just want to scale it to maximum, or?
Oh yeah, as many as you can, and then 50% more than that.
But should you have solar panels on the ocean? For me, it just sounds strange, but I see so many.
Solar panels on the ocean are dumb, because the ocean is, anybody that's lived near the ocean, and I haven't lived near it, but I've been around it enough to know that you don't put anything on the ocean that you want to keep. It's going to get wrecked. So, okay, you want to cover aqueducts or maybe reservoirs. You got to remember that most bodies of water, even artificial ones, they're ecosystems. They're not just a tank, right? So an aqueduct, well, you can argue that it's not really an ecosystem, and maybe putting a lid over it with solar panels isn't such a bad thing, because at least it'll keep the water temperatures from being so high. It'll reduce the evaporation. It'll keep the oxygenation levels. So maybe fish will enjoy to live there, like they did back when, all of the rivers here in Ontario, they had forest canopy over top of them, and they were shaded, and the oxygen content was really high, and you had giant fish jumping out of the water, and the native people thrived on the fishery that they had. And then we cut down all the trees for farming, and then all of a sudden the oxygen contents went down. The only thing you could it's not the best idea. So I like the idea of agrovoltaics, actually, where if you're going to put solar panels over arable land rather than on roofs and so on, that you do them in a smart way where the farmer gets two crops, one of electricity and the other of whatever plant matter. So for instance, I own a farm, and I lease the fields to my neighbor who grows a forage crop on those fields. And if we were smart and maybe a little richer, we would put solar panels on top of the hayfield. And if we could figure out a way to ensure that he could harvest still, and the panels weren't in the way. And by so doing, what we would do is we would shade them from the summer sun that makes them go dormant. Because the hay crop that feeds cattle, in the heat of the summer here, it goes dormant. It doesn't grow. It only grows in the spring and the fall. In the summer, the heat is too intense, and as a consequence, the lack of water stunts the growth, and most of the grasses go dormant. And you can prevent that if you have partial shade.